Now, as you know, this conference today, it's called Drugs, Fears, Facts and Feelings. And really what this morning aims to do is address fears about drug-related matters and the unknown issues around drugs at the moment, to look properly at the facts around drugs and drug use in Ireland in 2015 and feelings. It's about also helping parents to promote well-being in young people. Now, over the course of the morning, we are very lucky, we're going to be hearing from the Garda Commissioner. We're also going to be hearing from Kevin Sabat, and we're going to be hearing from Dr. Des Corrigan. We're not going to take questions over the course of the morning, but at the end of the morning there will be a question and answer session, at which point you'll be free to ask as many questions as you wish of our speakers this morning. But now I would like to invite our Garda Commissioner, Nóirín Sullivan, on what has been, I think, a truly tragic week for us, the population of Ireland as a whole, with the really awful murder of Garda Tony Golden in the Cooley Peninsula last weekend, and I think it has been a particularly tragic and difficult week for An Garda Síochána, and I think we would like all of us here to offer you our condolences, Commissioner, and to say we're very grateful for you being here this morning. So,
thanks, Keelin. Thank you. Thank you very much, Keelin. I suppose first thing I would like to say is good morning to everybody, and it is a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank Bernie in particular for extending the invitation, because you know, some people would say I've been on drugs most of my life, and that's probably true because I've worked in the area of drugs for a very long number of years. And certainly, you know, over 30 years ago when I started working, and my colleague here, Michael O'Sullivan, I suppose I'm going to do something here today as well. I've asked some of our colleagues to come here today because I think it is important that people work together and people get to know each other. And certainly what I found when I started with Dinny Mullins over 30 years ago on drugs, and sometimes I say to people I was 2 when I started, but obviously that's untrue. But Des Corrigan is just after reminding me, we used to, as young guards, go out to Shrewsbury Road, where Des was the single person in charge of what was the Forensic Bureau, and we'd have our drugs tested out in Shrewsbury Road. And Grania Kenny would certainly remember years ago working together. But I remember when I went to Store Street as a young guard, and heroin had just started to take prevalence on the streets around Dublin. And its devastating effects and the consequences of it was so evident. And Michael and myself worked for several years together. What we were known at the time was the Mockies. And going around, working around the streets of Dublin, you could see the devastating effects of heroin, and was very much confined to the Dublin area. But what you saw was the effect that it had on the users themselves, but particularly on their families. And that was probably when I first got to meet Bernie and Grania and people like that. And what was really truly inspirational was the families of those people who were becoming addicted to heroin and who were problematic users of various types of drugs, and particularly some of them prescription drugs, but particularly heroin. And when you saw the way the families stood up and rallied around and actually supported their own family members, but also supported the guards and the work that we had to do, and they weren't afraid to come forward. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again here, truly, in my career, some of the most inspirational people I have met are the families, the grandmothers, the mothers, the fathers, the brothers and sisters of some of those users, and indeed some of those users themselves. And I have to say that some of them are the most inspirational people I've met, and I owe them a huge gratitude, and certainly An Garda Síochána owe those people a huge gratitude, and particularly the people that worked with us and partnered with us to do the job that we have to do. And I suppose when I look at the job of An Garda Síochána and this conference today, there's a couple of messages that I'd like to get across. And the first things I'd like to get across is a shared understanding of what our job is and how we can help each other to do our job, but how can we help and support you as well, and particularly community awareness against drugs. And as I say, in the early 80s, the problematic drug problem was very much confined here to the city. Now it's evident all over the country, in every town, in every village, right across society, right across families, right across social demographic. So I think it's something that we need to address together. It's something that we need to create more education and awareness around, and that's why the work that's done by Community Awareness About Drugs, the education programs, the training programs and the shared understanding, because it is a very different problem than it was back in the 80s. It was problematic then, it was sinister then, it still remains very sinister. But when I look at the whole myriad of drugs that are there, and I know Des is going to speak after, so I'm not going to speak in detail about that. But if I look at the dangers that are lurking out there, both from prescription drugs, but from illegal drugs as well. Heroin, unfortunately, the same as right across Europe, we unfortunately still have people who are addicted to heroin. That's a fact. There has to be new and innovative ways to look at addressing the problem in relation to heroin. We have to work together to find that, and I very much welcome the fact that the new National Drug Strategy is going to be launched, and I think that that's an opportunity for us to find more collaborative ways to work together, which is really, really important. And I know that all of your groups, both the voluntary groups, the statutory groups, the community groups, all have an input into that in the consultation process. And I think it's important that we join together, because by joined up working together and thinking together and challenging each other in our assumptions around what we can do, that's really important. And I suppose that's at the strategic level. But then if I take it all the way down to the community level, and what does that mean? And sometimes over the years, I know that family members have discovered that people, members of their own family, let it be their sons, their daughters, their brothers, their sisters, or sometimes their grandchildren, are using drugs. And they're afraid to actually go to anybody to say, I think I have a problem. And for years in Ireland, we've had lots of stigma about lots of things. Drug use is one, and other things as well. But what I'd like the message to be today, and I'd like to get a message out through you, that if people identify problematic drug use in their family members, they should have no fear about going to the guards about it. Our focus is there to try to help people. Our focus is there. We have a huge job in terms of enforcement, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But firstly, if people identify that there is a problem drug use in their family, do not be afraid to go to the guards. Do not be afraid to come and raise your problem. The guards aren't interested in actually arresting your son or your daughter. What we're interested in doing is making sure that that person and you get the appropriate support and the appropriate referrals. But we do have a hard edge as well, and we do target, tackle and disrupt people that will supply drugs. Let that be at street level, let that be at national level, or let that be at international level. And we're in no doubt, and I know you are in no doubt, the organised criminal gangs and the criminal groups here in this country and in this city and right around the country that are distributing drugs, they don't care about the harm they're causing to the communities that they live in. They don't care about the ravage and the devastation they cause to your families and to wider families right across the country. So our job is to tackle those people, and we do it. And I'd like to pay tribute today to the work done. In doing that, what we've done is we've amalgamated what was known as our Garda National Drugs Unit and our Organised Crime Bureau, because these people are organised criminals. And I'd like to pay tribute to the great work that's been done by Michael and his team in what we colloquially call DOC-B, now Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. And over the last number of years, there has been hundreds of millions of euros worth of drugs seized, mostly heroin, cocaine. But what we're seeing, which is really worrying, is a new synthetic type of a drug and different psychoactive substances, which have an unknown effect on both the psychological effect, but also the physiological effect on young people. And we're seeing young people who use these drugs for the first time needing immediate psychiatric interventions. And that's a very worrying development and a very worrying phenomenon. And it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed. As well as that, we're seeing very problematic polydrug use, people who are using various types of substances, sometimes heroin and cocaine, sometimes heroin users using methamphetamine and crack cocaine. And that again, polydrug use causes a lot of problems in terms of the physiological effects. But what we're also seeing is a lot of young people who are using drugs which are seen to be harmless drugs, and sometimes drugs that are already available in the house, and maybe mixing them with alcohol and various things like that. And just chatting to Bernie earlier about one thing that we're identifying at a much earlier age is increased levels of aggression. Now, I don't know the cause of that, but I do know that we're seeing it. We're seeing it daily in the work that the men and women of An Garda Síochána do, and in the levels of aggression in young people in particular, and it's becoming a much younger age. And then we're seeing it in homes, a lot of aggression against parents. We're seeing a lot of familial aggression in homes, and sometimes again people are afraid to report that. And it's very important that nobody should be subjected to violence in their own home. And if people are being hurt or attacked in their own home, it's very important that they have the confidence to come to An Garda Síochána. And to do that, what we've asked people to do is we've actually set up a Protected Services Bureau down in Harcourt Square, and we're encouraging people to come and report if there are incidents, for example, of let it be domestic violence or familial violence, not to be afraid to come to report it. It's important. It's very important that everybody is protected, and particularly sometimes the most vulnerable people are those who are being attacked in their own home. So I'm very conscious of that people need to have the confidence. So there are some messages I would like to get. Also, what I would like to say is that in terms of the street level dealing that's happening, we have very dedicated people. Sometimes you won't see them, but they are there. They're working very hard at tackling street level drug dealing. So it's happening at a number of levels. Our commitment to you is that we will continue from the supply side to continue to disrupt, dismantle, and bring to the courts those people that are involved in drug dealing, drug importation at all its levels. But also, I'm very conscious of our role in the demand reduction and the harm reduction side. And the quantities of the seizures that I speak about in the hundreds of millions of euros worth of drugs, that's just indicative of the demand that's there for various drugs. It's also indicative, the types of drugs we're seeing is indicative of the diversification. And these people see themselves as business units, these organised criminal gangs. So out off in Europe and further afield, there are people, so-called chemists, who are there, and they're all the time looking and making up different types of drugs which come in. If I look at even, for example, cannabis, which some people think is very harmless, but if you look at the various types of cannabinoids, and if you look at the different methods of production of cannabis now, particularly hydroponic cannabis, it's changing all of the time. So it's something that we have to be very mindful of. It's something that we have to work together on. And I'm very conscious that in our work that we do in the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, yes, it's supply reduction, that's our job, enforcement is our job first and foremost. But equally, our job is to make sure that we work with the community, that we work with the voluntary, the statutory groups, we work as part of the National Drug Strategy to make sure that we're all working together, that we're all thinking together, and that we're all facing this challenge and this problem together. So what I'd like to do is thank you very much for the support you've shown us over several decades at this stage. I look forward to your continued support, and our promise to you is that we will support you in the work that you have to do. But my clear message that I would like you to take away is, please work with us and don't be afraid to engage with An Garda Síochána. We have regional drugs task forces and we have local drugs task forces right around the country. They do tireless work working with community groups, working with parents groups, and it's something that we want to make sure that we continue to grow and that we build on the success of those fora, and we make sure that our people are there for you, that the engagement that we have, and if there's something that you think that we should be doing differently, we're delighted to hear it. And that's an important thing as well. We want feedback on what it is we're doing. Unfortunately, because of the circumstances this week, I was hoping I would be able to stay, particularly to hear Des and Tony, and I heard some of Tony's presentation yesterday on the radio, but unfortunately I won't be able to stay, but Michael and my colleagues will be here. Please engage with them, because we do want to hear what we can do to help you, let that be in terms of education and training, and creating a shared understanding and awareness of how we can work better together. So, as I say, our commitment to you is that we will continue in our enforcement efforts. There's no doubt we want to build on our successes in that area. We want to make sure that people who will peddle misery and peddle harm on our communities are dealt with appropriately. But we also want to make sure that our vulnerable people, including people who find themselves becoming addicted or finding themselves caught up in a cycle of problematic drug use, are supported, are helped, and that the appropriate referrals are there for them. And also that the appropriate supports are there for families that find themselves in this dreadful situation. So, Bernie, again, I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and I thank all of you for the opportunity to talk to you. So, thank you very much.